Chapter 21. The Meaning of Religion. There are internal realizations always present within the whole self. There is comprehension of the meaning of all existence within each personality. The knowledge of multidimensional existence is not only in the background of your present conscious activity, but each man knows within himself that his conscious life is dependent upon a greater dimension of actuality. This greater dimension cannot be materialized in a three-dimensional system, yet the knowledge of this greater dimension floods outward from the innermost heart of being and is projected outward, transforming all it touches. This flooding out imbues certain elements of the physical world with a brilliance and intensity far surpassing that usually known. Those touched by it are transformed in your terms into something more than they were. This inner knowledge attempts to find a place for itself within the physical landscape, to translate itself into physical terms. Each man, then, possesses this inner knowledge within himself, and to some extent or other, he also looks for confirmation of it in the world. The outer world is a reflection of the inner one, though far from perfect. The inner knowledge can be compared to a book about a homeland that a traveler takes with him into a strange country. Each man is born with a yearning to make these truths real for himself, though he sees a great difference between them and the environment in which he lives. An internal drama is carried on by each individual, a psychic drama which is finally projected outward with great force upon the field of history. The birth of great religious events emerges from the interior religious drama. The drama itself is a psychological phenomenon in a way, for each physically oriented self feels thrust alone into a strange environment, without knowing its origins or destination or even the reason for its own existence. This is the dilemma of the ego, particularly in its early states. It looks outward for answers because this is its nature, to manipulate within physical reality. It also senses, however, a deep and abiding connection that it does not understand, with other portions of the self that are not under its domain. It is also aware that this inner self possesses knowledge upon which its own existence is based. As it grows in your terms, it looks outward for confirmation of this inner knowledge. The inner self upholds the ego with its support. It forms its truths into physically oriented data with which the ego can deal. It then projects these outward into the area of physical reality. Seeing these truths thus materialized, the ego then finds it easier to accept them. Thus, you deal often with events in which men are touched by great illumination, isolated from the masses of humanity, and endowed with great powers. Periods of history that appear almost unnaturally brilliant in contrast with others, prophets, geniuses, and kings shown in greater than human proportions. Now, these people are chosen by others to manifest outwardly the interior truths that all intuitively know. There are many levels of significance here. On the one hand, such individuals receive their unearthly abilities and power from their fellows, contain it, exhibit it for the physical world for all to see. They play the part of the blessed inner self that actually cannot operate within physical reality, uncloaked by flesh. This energy, however, is a quite valid projection from the interior self. The personality so touched by it actually does then become, in certain terms, what he seems to be. He will emerge as an eternal hero in the external religious drama, as the inner self is the eternal hero of the interior religious drama. This mystic projection is a continual activity. When the strength of one great religion begins to diminish and its physical effects grow less, then the internal drama begins once again to quicken. The highest of man's aspirations, therefore, will be projected upon physical history. The dramas themselves will differ. Remember, they are built up internally first. They will be formed to impress world conditions at any given time, and therefore couched in symbols and events that will most impress the populace. This is craftily done, for the inner self knows exactly what will impress the ego, and what kinds of personalities will best be able to personify the message at any given time. When such a personality appears in history then, he is intuitively recognized, for the way has long been laid, and in many cases the prophecies announcing such an arrival have already been given. The individuals so chosen do not just happen to appear among you. They are not chosen at random. They are individuals who have taken upon themselves the responsibility for this role. After their birth, they are aware to varying degrees of their destiny, and certain trigger experiences may at times arouse their full memory. They serve quite clearly as human representatives of all that is. Now, since each individual is a part of all that is, to some extent each of you serve in that same role. In such a religious drama, however, the main personality is much more conscious of his inner knowledge, more aware of his abilities, far better able to use them, and exultantly familiar with his relationship to all that is. Ideas of good and evil, gods and devils, salvation and damnation, are merely symbols of deeper religious values, cosmic values, if you will, that cannot be translated into physical terms. These ideas become the driving themes of these religious dramas of which I have spoken. The actors may, quote-unquote, return time and time again in different roles. In any given historic religious drama, therefore, the actors may have already appeared on the historic scene in your past, the prophet of today being the traitor of the past drama. These psychic entities are real, however. It is quite true to say that their reality consists not only of the core of their own identity, but also is reinforced by those projected thoughts and feelings of the earthly audience for whom the drama is enacted. Psychic or psychological identification is of great import here, and is indeed at the heart of all such dramas. In one sense, you can say that man identifies with the gods he has himself created. Man does not understand the magnificent quality of his own inventiveness and creative powers, however. Then say that gods and men create each other, and you come even closer to the truth, but only if you are very careful in your definitions, for how, exactly, do gods and men differ? The attributes of the gods are those inherent within man himself, magnified, brought into powerful activity. Men believe that the gods live forever. Men live forever, but have forgotten this. They remember only to endow their gods with these characteristics. Obviously, then, beyond these earthly historic religious dramas, the seemingly recurring tales of gods and men, there are spiritual realities. Behind the actors in the dramas, there are more powerful entities who are quite beyond role-playing. The plays themselves, then, the religions that sweep across the ages, these are merely shadows, though helpful ones. Behind the frame of good and evil is a far deeper spiritual value. All religions, therefore, while trying to catch quote-unquote truth, must to some large degree fear its ever eluding them. The inner self alone, at rest, in meditation, can at times glimpse portions of these inner realities that cannot be physically expressed. These values, intuitions, or insights are given each to each according to his understanding, and so the stories told about them will often vary. For example, the main character in a religious historical drama may or may not consciously be aware of the ways in which such information is given to him, and yet it may seem to him that he does know, for the nature of a dogma's religion will be explained in terms that this main character can understand. The historical Jesus knew who he was, but he also knew that he was one of the three personalities composing one entity. To a large extent, he shared in the memory of the other two. The third personality, mentioned many times by me, has not in your terms yet appeared, although his existence has been prophesied as the quote-unquote second coming. Now, these prophecies were given in terms of the current culture at the time, and therefore, while the stage has been set, the distortions are deplorable, for this Christ will not come at the end of your world, as the prophecies have been maintaining. He will not come to reward the righteous and send evildoers to eternal doom. He will, however, begin a new religious drama. A certain historical continuity will be maintained. As happened once before, however, he will not be generally known for who he is. There will be no glorious proclamation to which the whole world will bow. He will return to straighten out Christianity, which will be in shambles at the time of his arrival, and to set up a new system of thought when the world is sorely in need of one. By that time, all religions will be in severe crisis. He will undermine religious organizations, not unite them. His message will be that of the individual in relation to all that is. He will clearly state methods by which each individual can attain a state of intimate contact with his own entity, the entity to some extent being man's mediator with all that is. By 2075, all of this will be already accomplished. You may make a note here that Nostradamus saw the dissolution of the Roman Catholic Church as the end of the world. He could not imagine civilization without it. Hence many of his later predictions should be read with this in mind. The third personality of Christ will indeed be known as a great psychic, for it is he who will teach humanity to use these inner senses that alone make true spirituality possible. Slayers and victims will change roles as reincarnational memories rise to the surface of consciousness. Through the development of these abilities, the sacredness of all life will be intimately recognized and appreciated. Now there will be several born before that time who in various ways will re-arouse man's expectations. One such man has already been born in India, in a small province near Calcutta, but his ministry will seem to remain comparatively local for his lifetime. Another will be born in Africa, a black man whose main work will be done in Indonesia. The expectations were set long ago in your terms, and will be fed by new prophets until the third personality of Christ does indeed emerge. He will lead man behind the symbolism upon which religion has relied for so many centuries. He will emphasize individual spiritual experience, the expansiveness of soul, and teach man to recognize the multitudinous aspects of his own reality. The third historical personage, already born in your terms, and as a portion of the entire Christ personality, took upon himself the role of a zealot. The person had superior energy and power and great organizing abilities, but it was the errors that he had made unwittingly that perpetrated some dangerous distortions. The records of that historical period are scattered and contradictory. The man historically now was Paul or Saul. It was given to him to set up a framework, but it was to be a framework of ideas, not of regulations, of men, nor of groups. Here he fell down, and he will return as the third personality just mentioned in your future. In that respect, however, there are not four personalities. Now, Saul went to great lengths to set himself as a separate identity. His characteristics, for example, were seemingly quite different from that of the historical Christ. He was quote-unquote converted in an intense personal experience, a fact that was meant to impress upon him the personal and not organizational aspects. Yet some exploits of his in his earlier life had been attributed to Christ, not as a young man, but earlier. All personalities have free will and work out their own challenges. The same applied to Saul. The organizational quote-unquote distortions, however, were also unnecessary within the framework of history as events are understood. Saul's tendencies were known, therefore, at another level. They served a purpose. It is for this reason, however, that he will emerge once again, this time to destroy these distortions. Now, he did not create them on his own and thrust them upon historical reality. He created them in so far as he found himself forced to admit certain facts. In that world at that time, earthly power was needed to hold Christian ideas apart from the numberless other theories and religions, to maintain them in the middle of warring factions. It was his job to form a physical framework, and even then he was afraid that the framework would strangle the ideas, but he saw no other way. When the third personality re-emerges historically, however, he will not be called the old Paul, but will carry within him the characteristics of all the three personalities. Paul tried to deny knowing who he was until his experience with conversion. Allegorically, he represented a warring faction of the self that fights against its own knowledge and is oriented in a highly physical manner. It seemed that he went from one extreme to another, being against Christ and then for him, but the inner vehemence was always present, the inner fire, and the recognition that he tried for so long to hide. He was the portion that was to deal with physical reality and manipulation, and so these qualities were strong in him. To some extent, they overruled him. When the historical Christ quote-unquote died, Paul was to implement the spiritual ideas in physical terms, to carry on. In so doing, however, he grew the seeds of an organization that would smother the ideas. He lingered after Christ, just as John the Baptist came before. Together, the three spanned some time period, you see. John and the historical Christ each performed their roles, and were satisfied that they had done so. Paul alone was left at the end unsatisfied, and so it is about his personality that the future Christ will form.